I used to think one financial emergency could completely undo everything I had built. Most mornings, money was already on my mind before I even left home. I made coffee, checked the clock, and wondered how much I could safely spend. On the train, everyone looked ordinary, but I kept thinking about unexpected expenses. At work, I tried to focus while quietly carrying the weight of financial uncertainty. That afternoon, an unexpected expense appeared, and my stomach tightened almost immediately. I could afford the payment, but spending that money suddenly felt dangerous. Later, I stood in a grocery aisle, noticing how quickly small costs added up. At checkout, the total was higher than I expected, and I paused. I looked at the receipt, realizing how easily ordinary spending could drain my savings. Walking home, I kept thinking about how quickly my money could disappear. That night, I wrote down one simple number I wanted to reach. I decided to remove one expense that I didn't really need anymore. Instead of ordering dinner, I cooked at home and watched my spending carefully. Then I moved a small amount into savings before I could spend it. Over time, that small balance slowly became something I could finally rely on. I started imagining emergencies differently because one bad month no longer felt impossible. Then another ordinary bill arrived, waiting for me on the kitchen table. This time, I looked at it calmly, knowing I had money set aside. For the first time, I felt relief, but I wondered how much relief was enough. After that first emergency, money started feeling less like a number and more like breathing. I noticed something immediately. Paying it didn't leave me wondering what came next. Then my car suddenly needed a repair I hadn't planned for that month. For once, the problem felt inconvenient instead of frightening to me. At work, I noticed how much less often I worried about every unexpected cost. I realized my financial buffer had quietly changed how I experienced ordinary problems. I walked through the park without mentally calculating what every unexpected expense could cost. That freedom made me curious about whether my money could start working too. I studied my financial statement carefully, trying to understand where my money was going. I made a cautious investment decision without needing every dollar immediately available. The next morning, I returned to work without feeling like everything depended on one paycheck. At lunch, I listened while my coworker worried about an unexpected financial problem. Later, I walked past something I wanted and realized I could simply say no. For once, having money gave me control over my time, not another reason to spend. That night, I wrote down a larger financial target than the one before. Months later, I finally reached the number I had been working toward. I felt proud because the number represented choices I didn't have before. But almost immediately, another number appeared in my mind, waiting somewhere farther ahead. The number itself was starting to feel satisfying, even before it changed anything. The thing that was supposed to buy freedom had started becoming a scoreboard. My financial situation improved, and suddenly the next number started feeling important. I felt a quick rush of satisfaction that had nothing to do with survival anymore. Walking downtown, I started noticing things I would have ignored before. One expensive product caught my attention, even though I didn't actually need it. I imagined owning it, and somehow imagined the feeling would last longer than it could. I could afford it, so eventually, I decided there was no reason not to. For a little while, buying it felt strangely rewarding. A few days later, that excitement had quietly disappeared. Then I saw a newer version, and the cycle started again. I compared what I owned with what was newer, and suddenly mine felt outdated. Later, a friend casually mentioned an expensive purchase he had just made. I noticed my reaction before I even understood why I was reacting. I wanted an upgrade, even though nothing about my life actually required one. To justify it, I started working later, telling myself the extra effort made sense. Soon, even dinner became another small way of rewarding myself for working harder. Around me, expensive choices looked normal, and that changed what normal meant to me. When I finally got home, I realized the better life didn't feel better. I opened my financial notebook, expecting the numbers to explain what I was feeling. Instead, I saw something simpler. The target had moved again. I was earning more, but the meaning of enough was slowly disappearing. I started driving through neighborhoods where the houses suddenly looked completely different from mine. A few years earlier, those houses would have seemed completely impossible to me. Now I walked past expensive stores without feeling like they belonged to another world. Everywhere I looked, expensive things seemed less like luxuries and more like ordinary choices. At work, Even casual conversations started revealing how much everyone's definition of normal had changed. People casually talked about expensive purchases as though they were completely ordinary parts of life. I didn't say anything, but I quietly started comparing my life with theirs. Then I traveled, and even the airport started showing me a different version of normal. Convenience became something I expected instead of something I appreciated. At dinner, the price felt less important because the experience had become familiar. Later, I walked through a house that once would have felt wildly extravagant. Standing there, I caught myself imagining what it would feel like to own it. Then I calculated exactly what earning enough for that lifestyle would require. The answer wasn't impossible, but it meant giving more of my time away. That evening, I bought groceries while noticing how expensive my ordinary basket had become. The strange part was that my old routine suddenly looked smaller than before. I finally understood that earning more hadn't made my lifestyle cheaper. I sat quietly, realizing every upgrade created something else I needed to maintain. The lifestyle itself had become another financial obligation I couldn't easily walk away from. The trap wasn't buying something once. It was needing the income to keep it forever. As my wealth grew, I started entering financial rooms that once felt completely unfamiliar. The room felt different from the simple bank where my financial journey had started. I sat across from a professional who presented opportunities one had never considered before. Before deciding anything, I opened the documents and started reading the details carefully. The opportunity sounded attractive, especially because I could finally afford to participate. Instead of asking what I could make, I asked what could go wrong. That question opened another layer, where complexity could hide costs I couldn't immediately see. Later, I visited a real estate development that promised another attractive path for my money. I began understanding how leverage could magnify both the gains and the losses. I also considered concentrating more money into something I believed would keep growing. Then I stopped and asked myself whether confidence was replacing careful judgment. I went home and reviewed everything I already owned before making another decision. Having more money hadn't removed risk. It had simply made some risks harder to notice. The next week, I attended another meeting where a different opportunity appeared. Again, everything looked polished, sophisticated, and almost too good to ignore. This time, I asked a simpler question: who actually benefits from this transaction? I returned home realizing that wealth could make complicated decisions feel unnecessarily normal. I wrote down every risk I understood before deciding whether the opportunity belonged in my life. I finally understood that wealth required judgment, not just the ability to accumulate. The richer I became, the more expensive a small misunderstanding could become. As my lifestyle changed, I started noticing something different in the people around me. My friend noticed the changes too, especially the things I could suddenly afford. Then came a casual request for help that I hadn't expected. I didn't answer immediately because I wasn't sure what my money meant anymore. Part of me wanted to help, but another part felt strangely pressured. Later, I met my family and realized money could enter ordinary conversations too easily. Someone mentioned money casually, and suddenly everyone seemed aware of what I could afford. I realized expectations didn't always arrive as demands. Sometimes they arrived quietly. At another social event, I noticed wealth had become part of the atmosphere. Expensive watches, cars, clothes, and conversations made status impossible not to notice. Without meaning to, I started comparing my possessions with everyone else's. Afterward, I walked through a shopping mall thinking about what I had seen. One purchase suddenly felt necessary, even though I knew it wasn't. Then I stopped myself and realized I was trying to fit into something. I drove home wondering how often money had started influencing my decisions. At home, I cooked dinner and finally had space to think. I started asking myself what kind of person I wanted money to make me. I realized wealth could create invisible obligations even when nobody explicitly asked for anything. I decided generosity should be something I choose, not something I use to prove myself. Money had changed my relationships with others, but it was changing my relationship with myself too. I started waking up thinking about the next financial milestone before anything else. At work, I moved faster because reaching that number suddenly felt urgent. Then I received financial news that pushed my numbers higher than expected. For a few seconds, I felt an immediate rush that was hard to explain. I celebrated by buying something expensive, telling myself I had earned it. But the excitement faded much faster than I expected it would. Then I saw another milestone, and suddenly the previous achievement felt smaller. I responded by working harder, convinced the next number would feel different. Even during exercise, my mind kept calculating how much further I could go. I ate quickly between tasks, treating even meals like interruptions to progress. Eventually, I realized my mind was measuring progress almost constantly. Later, I walked through a luxury mall and noticed the same feeling returning. Another status symbol caught my attention before I even realized I wanted it. I imagined owning it and immediately imagined how successful that would make me feel. Later, I admitted to myself that I didn't actually need it. So I went somewhere quiet, hoping my mind would finally slow down. For once, there was nothing to improve, calculate, purchase, or achieve. Strangely, doing nothing felt uncomfortable after spending so long chasing progress. That evening, I looked across the city and wondered what I was actually chasing. Making more money now felt easier than deciding what the money was actually for. I stayed late at the office, even though there was no emergency waiting. Around me, the building slowly emptied while I kept staring at my work. Eventually, I packed my things and walked out long after everyone else. Outside, the city was quiet, and I realized how late it had become. On the way home, I was already thinking about tomorrow's work. When I reached home, even my own kitchen felt strangely unfamiliar. I ate dinner alone, barely noticing what was on my plate. Then I noticed something I had bought to make life easier. Instead of enjoying it, I immediately wondered what I should upgrade next. I went to bed, but my mind kept returning to tomorrow's responsibilities. A few days later, I left town for a short trip. I was supposed to be resting, but I checked work almost immediately. From the hotel room, I looked outside and realized I had escaped nothing. Physically, I was somewhere else. Mentally, I was still sitting at work. When I returned home, the same routine was waiting exactly where I'd left it. At the grocery store, I watched people moving through their ordinary evenings. For once, I noticed how much happiness seemed to exist without constant optimization. Later, I sat in a park without trying to make the moment productive. That's when I finally saw the contradiction I'd been avoiding for years. What if financial independence wasn't having more, but needing less from money? I woke at sunrise, and for once, I wasn't thinking about another number. I made coffee slowly, without rushing toward whatever came next. Looking around my home, I noticed how much ordinary life I already had. None of it looked extraordinary, but suddenly, that didn't seem important anymore. I walked through my neighborhood without comparing my life with anyone else's. At the store, I bought something because I genuinely needed it. I didn't look for an upgrade, because the thing I owned already worked. I went to work normally, without feeling like every hour needed maximizing. I still saved and invested, but now they were tools instead of trophies. Later, I passed the bank where my obsession with security had first started. I stopped for coffee with someone I cared about and left the money behind. For once, our conversation stayed focused on life instead of what everything cost. Afterward, I walked through the park and let the afternoon move without me. I watched people enjoying simple moments, and I finally understood what I'd been protecting. I returned home that evening without feeling like I had missed something. I cooked dinner slowly, enjoying something I once considered too ordinary to notice. At sunset, I stood outside and watched the sky change without checking anything. I closed my financial notebook after finally deciding what enough meant for me. Money could protect the life I chose, but it never needed to become my life. Anything more can cause harm, no matter how sweet it is.